I watched the recording 3 times before I fully accepted what I was seeing. My mother was standing on my apartment doorstep, one hand pressed flat against her chest, her face arranged into something that was supposed to look like grief. My brother was behind her, head tilted down, shoulders curved inward the way they always curved when he needed something. And they were talking. Not to me, I hadn't opened the door yet, but to each other, quietly, carefully, rehearsing. I watched my mother practice a slow exhale. I watched her press the corners of her eyes with her fingertips. I watched my brother say something, and then she nodded. And then she repositioned her hand on her chest and tried the exhale again. They had been standing there for 4 minutes before they finally rang the bell. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open in front of me, and I watched the whole thing play out on my screen. And I thought about the 2 years I had spent learning how to breathe without them. 2 years of silence that they had apparently decided was over. Not because they had changed. Not because they had called a therapist or written me a letter or done a single thing differently. But because they needed something again, and showing up at my door with grief on their faces had always worked before. It didn't work this time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because the beginning matters. The beginning is how you understand why I had that laptop open in the first place. Why I was sitting at my kitchen table, completely calm, watching them rehearse on my doorstep instead of rushing to the door. Why, by the time they finally rang that bell, I already had everything I needed. My name is Dana. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed physical therapist. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio. And for the first time in my adult life, my bank account has the same number in it at the end of the month that it had at the beginning. That last part sounds like a small thing. It isn't. It took me a very long time to get there. I grew up the older of 2 children. My brother is 3 years younger than me. And from the time he was about 15 years old, the entire family operated on a single principle. My brother's needs came first. Not because he was cruel, at least not at first. Not because my parents didn't love me, but because my brother was difficult and I was easy, and somewhere along the way those 2 things got translated into my brother requiring endless accommodation and me requiring nothing at all. He failed his junior year of high school. My parents hired 3 tutors. He crashed his first car at 19. My parents bought him another one. He dropped out of community college after 1 semester. My parents said he just hadn't found his path yet. I graduated with honors, paid for my own books, worked 20 hours a week through my undergraduate years, and the one time I asked my father for $200 to cover a gap in my rent, he told me that I was the responsible one, that I'd figure it out. I did figure it out. I always figured it out. That was the problem. By the time I was 26 and working my first real job, I had absorbed so completely the idea that I was the capable one, the steady one, the one who didn't need help, that I had started applying that logic to my brother too. He called me in January of the year I turned 27 and told me he was in trouble. He'd lost his job. He had 3 months of back rent owed on a room he was renting from a friend. He needed $400, and he would pay me back as soon as he got back on his feet. I sent the money that afternoon. He called again in March. $800 this time. Car payment. He'd pay me back double, he said. I was his sister. I was the only person who ever really came through for him. I sent the money. I want to be clear about something, because I've thought about this a lot in the years since. I didn't send that money because I was foolish. I sent it because I believed him. Because he sounded genuinely scared. Because the story I had been told my entire life was that my brother was fragile and I was strong, and strong people help fragile people when they're scared. That's what family does. That's what I had been taught, over and over, in 100 different small ways, every single year I was growing up. By the time I was 28, I had lent my brother just under $9,000. I used the word lent loosely. None of it had been repaid. Every time I brought it up, something happened. There was a new crisis. There was a reason why right now wasn't a good time to talk about it. My mother called to tell me that I was being hard on him, that he was struggling, that family didn't keep score. My father said almost nothing, which was how my father had communicated my entire life silence that I learned to read as agreement with whoever was speaking most recently. The $9,000 was money I had been saving for 2 years. I had been planning to use it as a down payment on a car that wasn't 14 years old and didn't shake when I drove it above 50 miles an hour. I drove the shaking car for another year and a half. The thing that finally broke it open wasn't dramatic. It wasn't one big blow-up. It was a Thursday afternoon in October when I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of the grocery store and my phone rang, and it was my brother, and before I even answered, I thought, how much this time? Not what does he need, not I wonder how he's doing. Just, how much this time? I sat in that parking lot for a long time. I didn't answer the phone. He called twice more. Then my mother called. Then my brother texted, Dana, it's kind of urgent. Can you pick up? I drove home. I sat on my couch. I thought about the car I didn't have. I thought about the savings account that kept being emptied. I thought about the fact that I was 28 years old and I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me how I was doing and actually waited for the answer. I didn't call back that night. I didn't call back the next day. On Sunday, my mother left a voicemail that lasted 4 minutes and covered, in order, how worried she was, how hurt my brother was, how this wasn't like me, how family sticks together, especially in hard times, how she had raised me better than this, and how she hoped I would pray on it. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it to a folder on my phone that I labeled, simply, Reference. I called my mother back that evening and I told her, in a calm and even voice, that I needed some space. I told her I loved her and I loved my brother, but that I needed to step back from the dynamic we had built as a family and figure out what I actually wanted my life to look like. I told her I would be in touch when I was ready. She cried. She said I was breaking up the family. She said my brother needed me. She said she didn't understand what had happened to me. I said I understood that this was hard. I said goodbye. I hung up. That was 2 years and 3 months before the morning I watched them standing on my doorstep. In those 2 years, I did things I had never let myself do before. I saved money, and I kept it. I bought a reliable car, nothing fancy, a 4-year-old Honda that started every morning without complaint. I made friends who had no idea about my brother or my parents or any of it. People who knew me only as Dana, who brought good snacks to potlucks and laughed too loud at her own jokes. I started therapy, not because something was catastrophically wrong, but because I had carried so much for so long that I needed help putting it down in an organized way. My therapist was a small, precise woman named Dr. Holloway, who had a habit of letting silences run longer than was comfortable, and who said to me in our third session, "It sounds like you learned very early that your needs were an inconvenience to the people who were supposed to meet them." That sentence rearranged something in me that I'm still rearranging. I had not completely cut off contact with my family. I want to be honest about that. I texted my mother on her birthday. I sent a card to my father at Christmas. I had not spoken to my brother since that Thursday in the parking lot, but I hadn't blocked his number either. I was in what I thought of as a holding pattern, not gone, but not available in the way I had always been available. What I hadn't done was told them my new address. I moved apartments 8 months into my separation from the family dynamic. My old place had too many associations, too many memories of sitting at my kitchen table after I'd sent another transfer and trying to figure out how to re-budget my next 3 months. My new apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in a different part of the city. It had a little balcony that got afternoon sun. I had a very nice rug in the living room that no one had ever borrowed money against. I loved it there. I had not given my mother or my brother my new address. I had not told my father. As far as they knew, I was somewhere in Columbus, unavailable. I still don't entirely know how they found it. My best guess is a mutual cousin I should have been more careful around at Thanksgiving, but that's not the part that matters. What matters is that 8 days before they appeared on my doorstep, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "Dana, it's me. I need to talk to you. I know you're in Columbus. I'm sorry for everything. Please." No name, but I knew my brother's cadence in a sentence the way you know a person's walk from across a parking lot. I didn't respond. 2 days after that, my mother called my cell phone from a different number she'd been calling from a friend's phone. I realized, because she'd figured out I was letting her calls go to voicemail. I didn't pick up. She left a message. Her voice was tired and worn at the edges in a way I hadn't heard before, and she said that my father had been having some health scares and the family needed to come together, and she hoped I would think about what really mattered. I sat with that for a long time, not because I didn't care about my father, because I did. Because that exact sentence, think about what really mattered, had been used on me so many times that I had developed an almost medical response to it. A tightening in the chest, a rush of guilt that arrived before I'd even had time to think about whether the guilt was warranted. I called my father's doctor. I'm not going to explain exactly how I managed that. It took some creativity and a very patient receptionist, but I was able to confirm that my father had had a routine cardiology follow-up 6 weeks earlier and that his chart indicated he was stable and managing well with current medication. There were no hospitalizations. There were no emergencies. There was no crisis. There was, instead, a story being constructed to get me to open a door. I want to be very careful here, because I know how this sounds. I know it sounds cold to say I verified my father's medical status before taking my mother's word for it. But I had spent years being the person who took everyone's word for everything. And what I had learned, slowly, and at significant personal cost, was that the people who most need you to take their word for things are often the people whose words you most need to verify. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even particularly surprised. I was just clear. I set up my laptop camera the night before, pointed at the front door. Not a fancy system, just my laptop, propped on a small shelf I moved from the bedroom, with the screen cracked open and the camera application running in the background. I connected it to my phone so I could see the feed from anywhere in the apartment. Then I went to bed, slept better than I'd slept in a week, and woke up the next morning and made coffee. They arrived at 9:47. I was at my kitchen table, coffee going cold beside me, watching them on my screen before they rang the bell. I watched my mother find the right expression. I watched my brother speak to her quietly. And I watched her nod. And I watched her exhale again. And I watched her lift her chin at exactly the angle that had always made me feel like I was failing her by not immediately fixing whatever was wrong. I felt something watching that, but it wasn't what I expected. I expected anger, or grief, or the old familiar guilt rolling in like weather. Instead, I felt something very quiet settle over me, like the moment after a long noise stops and you realize how loud it had been all along. I had known them my entire life. I loved them in the complicated, aching way you love people who shaped you, even when the shaping left marks. But I was watching my mother practice tears on my doorstep, and I understood, completely and without any drama at all, that this visit was not about my father's health. It was not about missing me. It was about something they needed. And they had come prepared to perform whatever was required to get it. The bell rang. I took my printed document from the kitchen counter. I had put it together 3 nights earlier, not in anger, just as a matter of record. It was a single page, printed cleanly. Across the top it said Summary of Financial Transfers, 2019, 2022. Below that, dates and amounts, 43 separate transactions. A total at the bottom, $8,940. I walked to the door. I took a breath. I opened it. My mother's face did the thing she had practiced, the slow collapse, the press of her lips, the eyes already glistening. My brother stood slightly behind her, hands in his jacket pockets, that particular tilt to his head that had always been designed to make him look younger than he was. "Dana," my mother said, and her voice had the texture of something rehearsed, soft, careful. "We've missed you so much." I looked at her. I looked at my brother. I smiled. "I know," I said. There was a pause. My mother hadn't expected that. She'd expected tears or resistance or the particular softening in my face that had always told her the door was open. She got a smile and 2 words, and she wasn't sure what to do with them. "Can we come in?" she asked. "We need to talk. Your dad, Dana. Your dad has been—" "Mom," I said. I called Dad's cardiologist. Another pause. Longer this time. My brother shifted his weight. My mother's carefully arranged expression developed a small crack along the edge, something that wasn't quite guilt but lived in the same neighborhood. "He's stable," I said, "managing well with current medication." I was glad to hear it. My mother opened her mouth. She closed it. I want you both to know something, I said. I don't have any anger in me right now. That might surprise you. It surprised me a little too. I held out the document. This is a summary of the money I transferred to you. I looked at my brother between 2019 and 2022. I'm not asking you to pay it back today. I'm not asking you to pay it back ever. But I want it to exist as a piece of paper in the world, because for a long time it only existed in me, and that cost me more than the money did. My brother looked at the paper. He didn't take it. Dana, this isn't my mother started. I'm not finished, I said, and my voice was so even it surprised even me. What I need is for both of you to understand that I am not available in the way I used to be available. Not for emergencies that aren't emergencies. Not for situations that require me to feel guilty enough to come back. I love you. I do. And I also have a life that I have built very carefully. And I am not willing to set it on fire because showing up rehearsed didn't work. My mother flinched. The word landed, and I watched it land, and I didn't soften it. I saw the footage, I said, before you rang the bell. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence than anything that had come before it. My brother looked at the doorframe. My mother's hand, the one she'd had pressed to her chest, dropped to her side. I set the document down on the small table just inside my door. I wasn't going to make them take it. It was there if they wanted it. I'll reach out when I'm ready, I said. I meant that 2 years ago, and I mean it now. If there is ever a real emergency, and I mean a real one, you can call me and I will answer. But I'm not going to reward a performance. I'm not 17 years old anymore. I looked at my brother for a moment, not with hatred, not even with the complicated grief I thought I might feel, just with the particular clarity of seeing someone very well. I hope you figure it out, I said. I genuinely do. And then I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a moment and waited for something to crash through me, the guilt, the second guessing, the familiar voice in my head that had spent 3 decades telling me I was being selfish. I waited for it, the way you wait for rain after you hear thunder. It didn't come. I went back to my kitchen table. I picked up my coffee, which had gone completely cold by now, and I poured it out and made a fresh cup. Through my window, I could see a slice of my small balcony. The 2 plants I'd bought last spring that had somehow survived the winter. The folding chair I sat in on weekend mornings with a book. Small things. Mine. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, fading, then nothing. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I don't want to make it sound cleaner than it was. I cried that afternoon. Not immediately I went to work. I saw my patients. I came home, but around 7 o'clock I was washing dishes and something loosened in my chest and I stood at my sink and cried for a while. Not grief, exactly. Something more like the release of a breath held so long you'd forgotten you were holding it. I cried for the girl who had sent those 43 transfers and written it off each time as what family does. I cried for all the versions of an easier life I'd postponed to keep the peace. I cried a little for my mother, who had learned somewhere in her own life that love was a performance and passed that lesson along without knowing she was doing it. I cried for my brother, who had been so indulged and so enabled that he had become, without anyone meaning for it to happen, a person who rehearsed sincerity on a stranger's doorstep. And then I stopped. I dried my hands. I texted Dr. Holloway to ask if she had an opening that week. She did, and I made a note to tell her that I'd gotten through it without falling apart, which felt like something worth documenting. I made dinner. I sat on my balcony until the light faded. I called my friend Tess and told her the short version, and she said, "Dana, I'm so proud of you," and something about hearing it from someone with no stake in the matter made it real in a way it hadn't quite been before. A week later, I received a text from my mother from her own number. She said she had been thinking. She said she hadn't known about the money. I wasn't sure if I believed that, but I decided to hold the possibility open. She said she wanted to understand what had gone wrong. She said she wasn't asking to come back in. She was just asking if we could talk sometime. I sat with that for several days. Then I responded. I told her I was open to a conversation. I told her it needed to be a real one, and I told her that I was no longer interested in conversations designed to move me toward a predetermined conclusion. I told her I would be in touch. I haven't responded to anything from my brother, Not because I've decided that's permanent, but because I understand now that my readiness is the only timeline that matters, and I'm not ready yet. Maybe I will be someday. Maybe I won't. I've stopped treating that uncertainty like a problem I have to solve immediately. What I know is this. I have an apartment with a rug I love, and 2 plants that survived winter, and a balcony chair I sit in on Sunday mornings. I have a car that starts without complaint. I have a savings account that ends each month a little fuller than it started. I have friends who know me without context, and a therapist who lets silences run long, and a job I am genuinely good at. I have a life. It's mine. I built it carefully, and I am not willing to rehearse sadness about that for anyone. If you are somewhere tonight watching this and you recognize something in what I've described, that particular exhaustion of being the capable one, the steady one, the one who always figures it out, I want to say something directly to you. Not advice, because I'm not in a position to tell you what your life should look like. Just this. The fact that you keep figuring it out does not mean you should have to. The fact that you can absorb the cost doesn't mean the cost should fall to you. Those are 2 different things. And confusing them is something that gets taught early and untaught slowly. You are allowed to put the document on the table. You are allowed to close the door. You don't have to be angry to do it. You don't have to have a perfect argument, or a clear conscience, or the certainty that you're making the right call. You just have to decide that the life you are building is worth protecting, even from the people who taught you to build it. I made myself a cup of tea last Sunday, and sat on my balcony and watched the sky go from gray to pale gold. And I thought about nothing in particular, just sat there, just breathed. The city made its usual sounds below me, and my plants were green in the morning light, and it was, in the way that ordinary mornings can be if you let them, just about exactly enough. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? I like knowing someone is out there listening. It makes the quiet feel a little less quiet, in the best possible way.